His mowing? If I, there's there's nothing left whenever he gets through. You are a professional. He's like he's drag racing out there. You're doing the go kart. You're doing the lawnmower races. That's what you should do. Is you should get in those lawnmower races. Uh, yeah. Any other prayer requests besides Roger and Brenda? Yeah, I know, right? That's too late for that. Probably could. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Probably could. Uh huh. Yeah, that's yeah, this is going south in a hurry. Generally, if this doesn't stop, it doesn't end well. Mm. Oh shoot! Need to keep Ann in prayers. She's doing well, but still's got some upper respiratory stuff going on and whatnot. So just need to keep her in prayer. Keep Lucretia in prayer with all that she's got going on. Of course, it's good to see her Sunday, but still weak and long ways from recovering and all that kind of stuff. So need to keep them in prayer. Who is Ann? Is okay. So all right. Ann is listening, or she's at least got her phone on and is sleeping while her phone is on to make people think she's listening. Yeah. I, I think you've got Brenda embarrassed for the first time. For the first time. Yeah, there are people making Christmas videos now already off of that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dave, you're right behind him. Why don't you lead in prayer? What was the prayer question? Okay, Brandy Chadwick. Okay, for sure. Tyson. Yeah, struggling with. Yeah, yeah. You keep that right. Yeah, yeah. There comes a point where there's a realization, and that's hard to accept sometimes. Yeah, yeah. No doubt. Need to keep that family in prayer for sure. All right. Deuteronomy 22. Um, love this chapter, just a very practical chapter in seeing how God established in the Old Testament, but almost this is almost a one-to-one into the New Testament in relation to principles and values, how you relate to each other. What's our responsibility to other people, right? What ought to be? What should we do? And how ought how should we live in just everyday affairs of life in relation to that? And so, really good passage. You may want to write in your Bible some cross references to the New Testament would be James 2, 15 and 16, um, where James talks about you see a brother in need and you say, um, in essence, my paraphrase, we'll pray for you, go, be filled, and it's what's use is what of what use is that? And James's whole premise in relation to that is faith without works is dead. So a person's relationship and their faith as in the everyday affairs of life should translate into and for the benefit of others around you. But if I'm so wrapped up in my day and the way my day is supposed to look, then what happens when something comes in that interrupts that day, right? And that just that terminology just shows you I've already got an agenda as far as what we're going to do, but there's something that came in and interrupted that day, right? And so walking before God, walking rightly before God, living rightly in relation to other people as you relate to God. And then the second New Testament passage I would say is 1 John 3:17. Very much the same, along the same lines. So Deuteronomy 22:1. You shall not see your countryman's ox or his sheep straying away and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly bring them back to your countryman. If your countryman is not near you, if you don't know him, then you shall bring it home to your house, and it shall remain with you until your countryman looks for it. Then you shall restore it to him. So, finders keepers, losers, weepers, not in God's economy, right? Not in God's economy. What does they say? Ownership is 9/10 of the law, right? Possession. That's right. It should be ownership, but its possession is 9/10 of the law, right? You've heard those statements before. Well, you see another one's livestock in relation to this livelihood, and you can't ignore it. You can't ignore it, right? And but the tendency would be to just move on in relation to your life's business, because number one, generally if an animal's out, it's out for a reason, right? so it's time, energy, and effort in order to to capture that, and then once you capture it, what are you going to do with it? If you don't know whose it is, what are you going to do with it? You're going to put it up. What do you got to do to it? What do you got to do to a cow that you catch? You got to feed it. So now it's what? Now it's costing you. Yeah, now it's costing you. Well, yeah, it covers both ends though, if you do and if you don't. So certainly if you do, absolutely. But if your countryman, the thought and idea is another fellow Israelite. So when you have countrymen there, think fellow Israelite. If a fellow Israelite has lost, but it's too far away, so you're making an assumption, maybe by type, breed, but you may not know exactly the particular owner in order to be able to send him word that you've got his livestock. So yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when he comes looking for it and realizes you have it, then you give it back to him. Well, yeah, you would. That's. I mean, that's the first thought, because now all of a sudden you do have time, money, and energy in relation to it. An Israelite expectation would be to cover that, but on my part, I wouldn't necessarily require that in order to give the animal back. So see, it's kind of like when we talk about friendship. Sometimes is a two-way street. It's a tit for tat. In other words, I give to you, so I should be getting back. And the reality is, a friendship should be two one-way streets. I'm going to be a friend to you regardless of whether or not you're going to be friend me back, right? There's only half of that you can per se control. So on this particular half, it's looking at what happens when you see a stray animal. What should you do? And the reality is, it's not possession's 9/10 of the law. I'm going to take it, and lucky me. Or because now I'm going to have it, and it could potentially cost me, not just in time, but also in money and funds, I'm actually going to extend that out and take care of that animal, even though it may cost me. Well, how can I do that? And the answer is you won't do it if you're not living in relation to faith in God, that He is going to provide and take care of you because you are doing that which God has called you to do, that which is right. There is very much a sense in which being rewarded for doing what is right, but that reward for doing what is right is not based upon because I did right. It's based upon because I have faith in God that this is the right thing to do before Him. And then He will take care of me however He sees fit. Yeah. It almost sounds like you're splitting hairs there, but we're really not. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 When you it's an extension, not necessarily this particular, but it's an extension. A lot of times we don't like to borrow from other people. Why don't we like to borrow from other people? Yeah, so everyone knows now that no one's going to borrow Roger a lawnmower because, clearly it's going to get tore up. And all of Brenda's stuff around is going to get tore up. But when you borrow something, really a Christian principle expectation should be what? As good or better. Yeah, as good or better. Yep. Yep. That doesn't come from nowhere. See, a lot of times people just think that's a good moral ethic. Well, the only reason it would be good in a moral ethic is because it's grounded in the Creator of God, Creator God. It's not just something you come up, we necessarily come up with. On the flip side of it, then, should we expect? I had a teacher once that said, she was in another state or whatever, and they had a funeral for one of her loved ones, and in that state, whenever they were driving to the graveside, no one pulled over. And she said that she didn't know for sure, but Texas was the only one that she had been a part of that she knew of in Texas where they pulled over out of respect whenever there was a funeral service. And her point, of course, you're young, so you're impressionable, was don't keep that going. Don't ever not do that, right? Always do that. always do that. Well, why? You know, it's a good, respectful thing to do that should be carried on, right? Well, these particular ethics aren't necessarily the expectation of a pagan. A pagan will do what? Sorry, you should have kept it in your pen. But a national, an Israelite should do what? It's yours. See, what is stealing? Taking something that's not yours, and who defines what that is? Well, for the Christian and Israelite, who defines what that is? God defines what that is. So I can't, a pagan would see a stray animal and take it and say, I didn't steal. God would say what? To an Israelite, he would say what? Yes, you did. Yeah, yes, you did. So it plays out. Verse 3. Thus you shall do with his donkey, and you shall do the same with his garment. You shall do likewise with anything lost by your countrymen, which he has lost and you have found. You're not allowed to neglect them. So it carries over into anything that you find, anything in relation that you find. You're not allowed to neglect that. You shall not. You remember the story with was it Tamar? She took her husband died, and so that culture is that your next brother steps up in order that there might be a line doesn't die. He died, and who was it? My mind's gone blank. Judah doesn't give her the younger brother. The younger brother goes and he spills his seed on the ground, won't go into her. And so then what happens? She acts like she was a prostitute because she said, whenever he's young, then we'll give him to you. He never did. Judah never did. What did she take as a pledge? His signet ring and his staff, right? She goes back to get it, and she's nowhere to be found. So now what? She stole it from me, and he can't say anything. How did that happen? Right? It's like the guy who went fishing on Sunday, caught the biggest fish of his life, but couldn't tell anybody because he wasn't supposed to be fishing. So, but then she comes back, and what does she say? This is yours. This is the one to whom it belongs. Is the one who I'm pregnant by. Yeah, there's a ownership there that's being carried through. Verse 4: You shall not see your countryman's donkey or his ox fallen down on the way, and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly help him to raise them up. So, got a man's ox in the ditch. How would we correlate that to today? Car broke down on the side of the road. Yeah, car broke down on the side of the road. You've got that person on the side of the road that's got that tire flat. What's our tendency? Move over in the other lane. Make sure we don't hit them, right? But our tendency should be when we drive by, and I'd say probably for most of us, hopefully it is that a woman? Is that a child? Are they stranded? You know, do they need help, and how can we help them in relation to that? Right now, generally, obviously, if you've got a guy there or whatever that's they're good and all this kind of stuff, but that's not necessarily the case really either, is it? But what prevents us, and I guess this is kind of the point I wanted to make, what prevents us from doing that? It can be fear. We're not claiming here that we would want our wives obviously to go middle of the night help somebody who's on the side of the road because of the danger involved. But we've got our agenda. We're too busy. We've got our itinerary for the day planned out, and this is intruding upon that. Yeah. Yep. Verse 5. A woman shall not wear man's clothing, nor shall a man put on woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. We're probably not, you're probably not talking here about a one-time event, okay? I mean, a lot of times this is preached and taught, well, anywhere, ever, always, and if someone does it, I mean, they're, almost going to hell. A transvestite, what's that being pushed today as? Lifestyle, acceptable, accept it, it's right, it's good, and you can't say anything that's wrong about that. And we say, what? We say, no, it's wrong. Now, we don't just pull this old passage in terms of it's specific to this particular law, but in thinking about this, think about the rest of the vein of this chapter as far as what he's talking about here. Because what will happen is if you throw that passage out and say, well, Deuteronomy 22 says, then what they're going to say is, yeah, but Deuteronomy 22, did you read the next verse? Right? And you're going to have to explain that. Okay? Now you can, but you're going to have to explain that. It says, if you happen along a bird's nest along the way in any tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself, in order that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. So why do you tell little Johnny he's going to go out? He grabs his BB gun, he's running out the door. What do you say? What are you going to go do? What does he say? Shoot some birds. And what do you say? It's like sometimes say good luck, But there's a sensitivity here in relation to all life, even animal life. You don't just, there's not just senseless killing. If you have we don't like to think about this, but the folks that talk about are concerned about the extinction of animals. Guess what? That's actually a biblical grounded thought. You kill a mother with its young, and you keep doing that. What's going to happen? They're going to be no more. They're going to become extinct. See, sometimes Christians, rightfully so, are accused of not being enough in relation to protection of life, animal life. If we had a better balance on that, we probably wouldn't be accused of that so much. And it's not a non-biblical idea, right? Verse 8, when you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you will not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone falls from it. So remember, on a housetop, on a house roof, for those particular, they're obvious. I don't know. I guess I would assume that you know this, but you may not. They're flat, so flat roofs, and that's where you spent most of your time. So in your house, probably most of the time, most of where you spend your time is probably living room or kitchen, right? Generally. Well, for them, that would be the rooftop. Why the rooftop? Well, they don't have AC, right? So where's it going to be the coolest to be? On the rooftop. So why is David at night on the rooftop? Right? It's not just because you're bored. It's like the main area where people are going to be. Well, when people are there, what's your responsibility towards them? Keep them safe. And if you don't put railing around the outside, then what's going to happen? Somebody's going to fall off. And whose responsibility is that? As a homeowner, see, that's mine. These homeowners, that's mine. So, what's the federal agency that makes sure that businesses are doing this? OSHA. Do they go overboard? Yeah, to the point of stupidity, right? So if we as if we were a Christian nation, which again, I don't think any of us are arguing that we're that, but if we had the Christian morals and values of this from the beginning, you wouldn't have to put all that stuff in place. Why? Because you would understand that we're responsible. I am responsible for that. I am responsible for that. Can't just, act as if it doesn't matter. No, someone could fall. So what? Put up the railing so they don't fall, right? You'd almost think that this is common sense, right? It's like, why do you have to tell somebody that, But it's not necessarily within our nature is to do what? No, it's your fault. You should have whatever, But you bear personal responsibility on that. Now, here's where you're going to get in trouble again if on the clothing issue, if you just carry that out. Here's what they're going to bring up to you, okay? Verse 9, you shall not sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, or all the produce of the seed which you have sown, and the increase of the vineyard will become defiled. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear a material mixed with wool and linen. How many of y'all are wearing clothes with mixed material, right? You're all defiled. Why would you have these things? Yeah. Is there anything inherently wrong with these things in and of themselves? In other words, does the wool defile? Does the donkey defile it? Does the ox defile it? Does this seed defile that seed? And the answer to that is no, it doesn't. So what's he doing here? If the seed is not the problem, if the material is not the problem, if the animal is not the problem, then what are they doing? What's God doing with that? Okay. What does she think? Okay. Obedience. Okay. Yeah. In doing this, what was he doing with Israel as it relates to the rest of the people around? Yeah, different, distinct, holy. Right? Holy doesn't mean better than that. Holy means set apart for a particular purpose. So if American culture, we all wear mixed material, and you come across a group of people that they don't. We went up to Pennsylvania a few years ago with for Josiah's wedding, Jeremiah's wedding. Y'all know Josiah got married? Jeff and Vicky didn't either, so whoops. That's like the kid I had in youth group who said he posted on Facebook that he got engaged, and I saw him Sunday, said, "Hey, congratulations on getting engaged." And he said, "Don't tell my mom and dad. I haven't told them yet." I said, "You posted it on Facebook. What are you thinking, right?" Anyway, when you're set apart for a particular purpose, you got a group of people. We went to Pennsylvania, and what's Pennsylvania land? Amish country. What do you notice when you automatically drive through the country? Horse and buggies, the clothes that they're wearing. We saw the way that they were yielding a crop. It's a tourist hotbed. Why? Because it is that different. So think about that. They're a come and see group of people. Why? Because they're different. They're that different. They're that distinct. And it's not because one or the other is bad, it's because God set it up that way. Right? So it's very much in that imagery you could see a one-to-one. So now when you start talking about, and here's where I go as it comes not just to homosexuality, but let's talk about the transgender all of that whole thing that's going on, is that God designed for there to be distinctions. And actually, if you don't have those distinctions, it doesn't set you apart in relation to. It's the philosophy of the little boy in Incredibles, right? Talking about superpowers, right? What was his response? Do you remember? Well, yeah. And he says, well, then everybody's the same, right? If that means then everybody's the same, then nobody's special. You're telling me I'm special, but the reality is if everybody's that way, well, then there's nobody that's special. Well, he actually got it, right? So Israel can't be a melting pot, right, in that way. God desires for them to be distinct. He desires for them to be different in relation to these things. Verse 12, you shall make for yourselves tassels on the four corners of your garment with which you cover yourself. You may want to put in there, and if you've got a concordance, you'll see it, Matthew 23:5. Jesus condemns the Pharisees and Sadducees on this. Why? What did they, instead of a distinction in order to be a help, what were they doing? Do you remember? It says, you love your long tassels. What were they wanting it for? Because he says to the people, listen to what they say, but don't do what they do. So in other words, they were telling them this is what ought to be, but they weren't doing it. What did they want? They wanted to be seen rather than to serve. They wanted to be seen rather than be served, rather than serve. So Matthew 23:5, he talks about that. All right, verse 13. If a man takes a wife and goes into her, then turns against her and charges her with shameful deeds and publicly defames her and says, I took this woman, but when I came near her, I did not find her a virgin. Then the girl's father and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of the girl's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. The girl's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man for a wife, but he turned against her. And behold, he has charged her with shameful deeds, saying, I did not find your daughter a virgin, but this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they spread the garment before the elders of the city. So the elders of that city shall take the man and chastise him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, give it to the girl's father, because he publicly defamed a virgin of Israel, and she shall remain his wife. He cannot divorce her all of his days. Sex before marriage matter to God? Yep, absolutely. Now, there's a lot to this. And for me, this sets up a basis in terms of, it's kind of the home fort, if you will, as it turns into how I'm even understanding New Testament passages and everything else. Whose character is being criticized here? The wife. You're right. The wife, right? And who else? Yeah, specifically her father. Because father is supposed to be what? Protector, provider, right? Protector, provider. And now when he's carrying that out as far as a protector and provider for her, when he is handing her off, he's handing her off as a pure, we mean that literally, a pure present for this young man. That's why I said the imagery of a service matters, because that's what's going on whenever we have a service. When that dad comes to the door, what does everybody do? Everybody stands up, and what do? And we've messed this up because we say you should look at what? The bride. But who should you be looking at? Both, father and the bride, because they are one. She wears what? White. Who has taken her through the crowd by the arm, protecting her? Dad. Gets to the front, what does he do? And the preacher says, who gives this woman to be now married to this man? And the very first symbolic act that you have is he does what? Yeah, and most of the time, what I got to tell them young boys is, boy, go down there and take her. Right? Boy, go down there and take her. Why? Because some of them are shuddering at the thought of having to come up to the father and take his precious baby. And now he has what? Dad does what? Dad sits down. And what do the two of them do? Usually it's while we pray, and then after we pray for God's blessing, then what do? They usually go up. And now what are you looking at? You're looking at a transfer. Well, now this guy comes back, and he ain't happy. So what does he do? Falsely accuses her because he wants to get rid of her. But in that culture, they immediately following the ceremony, they consummate the wedding, the vows. They consummate the vows. What does Dad do? Dad takes the bed sheets. Why does he do that? Because he's still in some ways protecting his daughter. And basically what he's saying is, my end of the bargain is good. My end of the bargain is good. I've done my part. Now, this kid ain't got much sense anyway. because he's I guess hoping that the father gave up the bed sheets or whatever the case may be, but that father, those are, we look at it and we say, well, man, that's just gross, that's just da-da-da-da. Those, for that father, that's a proud thing that his daughter carried out and that God did through them. And now that beggar is doing what? He's trying to publicly defame her. Well, and so the question is, and we can turn to other passages, the question is, the assumption is that that's her best option. Because there is other passages that it seems as though that if she wanted to, she could go back underneath the father. But the thing we've got to remember is, in that culture, what happens if she does that? What's she going to do? Because she's seen as, one, she's been publicly humiliated, wrongfully so, but what happens whenever you get accused? Yeah, whenever you get accused, then what? We are supposed to operate on innocent until proven guilty. But what happens? All of us, we've had, I know Dad knows there's at one time they boasted of the largest Sunday school in the nation, Jack Hiles, and there was an accusation against him about sexual behavior. As far as I know, there was nothing there. It was a secretary that made an accusation that was not, there were no grounds on it. But guess what? He carried that to his grave. Because there's always what with it? Question mark. Well, where there's smoke, there's... So now what's this girl going to do? So there is some question, because that's a good point. There is some question as to whether or not she does, because I think that what you actually have when you read the whole is that the women had more input than probably you see as an emphasis in the Bible, right? So in other words, if you really look, you'll see it oftentimes where like Rebecca was fond of Isaac. Most of the time we just look at, well, this is some sort of business transaction. Now she was fond of Isaac, right? In relation to that, the brothers asked her, "Do you want to go?" And she did what? She had to agree. No, I'll go. Right. And who gets the inheritance? The brother. And now what's that going to mean for her in relation to that? Yeah. So the reality is it's probably a God overseeing protection for her in the midst of that culture. See, when they came in the New Testament, they started asking about divorce, right? And they came back and said, Moses said to offer him a certificate of divorce. And Jesus comes back and says what? He did that because of your hardness of heart. In other words, Moses did it to protect those girls because you wouldn't. Because you're just handing them off for burning your bread. I'm convinced we don't have a clue as to, in America. In America, we have no clue as to what marriage really is. We have no clue. It is fondness and feelings that equal love. It's not about commitment. It's not about care. It's not about help meet. It's not about protection. And it should be. And it should be. So this man is supposed to carry on what Father was doing growing up, but this man instead does what? I want what I want, and I want her out. And now he's publicly defaming her for that. Well, Dad comes in, and he says, no, I don't think so. And so now what happens? It costs that man from his pocketbook, and oh, by the way, you can't just throw her to the curb. You have a responsibility to care for her. I don't care what you think about her. You've got a responsibility to protect and care for her. Now, we don't hear that a whole lot either, right? The question is, do you love her? By that, what do you mean? Do you have feelings for her? Well, I don't love her. So what you mean is, you truly don't love her, you're going to kick her to the curb and abandon her. Now, I'm not saying that you don't want feelings, right? But whenever we all of a sudden say, well, I don't have feelings anymore, we just say, I'm going to go do what I want to do because I don't have the feelings that I had whenever I got married. 46, 47 years, you still have the feelings you did whenever you first got married? Roger says yes because he didn't want to get beat. But the reality is those feelings have changed, right? Those feelings change. Yeah. They're stronger because they're deeper because you've lived through it. That's right. Just because he drives a lawnmower, he's still hanging her on. He's still hanging on. He's still hanging on. This should be the norm. This should be the norm. It matters. A father protects his daughter, and he protects her reputation, right? To the point when that comes back and he says, she wasn't a virgin when you gave to me. He says, I don't think so, bud. You ain't pulling that. I think so. I think that, yeah. Yep, I think so too. So, we make we make light of it. And fathers today are, well, what really difference does it really make? For them to get together, they get to know better. Their chances of making it a marriage is better off. So we're better. Well, guess what? Stats actually show you that that's not right. Stats actually show that that's actually a false statement, number one. that couples who live together last more than couples who don't live together. That's a false stat. It's not even a stat. It's a feeling that you think you have, but stats don't back that. And second, I'm kind of getting off on a wheel horse here, but the second thing is that comes across is, well, a person who's divorced, their second marriage will last because they learn from the first divorce. Guess what? The odds go up that they're going to get divorced. The odds actually go up on the second divorce more than what it does in the first one. And the third one, it even rates higher. Now, I know there's folks listening and people who have gone through that have made it through. But you know what? Everybody that I've ever experienced who's gone through that says, don't ever want to do that again. You know, I will learn from my mistakes. Learn from my mistakes, you know. And so it's grounded, and this is foundational stuff here in relation to the church. So verse 20, but if this charge is true that the girl was not found a virgin, he shall bring out the girl to the doorway of her father's house. The men of her city shall stone her to death because she has committed an act of folly in Israel by playing the harlot in her father's house. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. So see, she bears responsibility for her conduct as well, right? She bears responsibility for her conduct as well. Happens if a daughter says, I ain't going to listen to what daddy says. I don't care. I'm going to do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. Well, for them, there was consequences for that in relation to it because it was a major deal. If you I'm trying to not use a pun. If you back off of this, right, then what happens? You become like all the other nations around you. Go do what you want to do whenever you do. And you start to do what? You start mixing all that stuff together. So the distinctions now are not carried out. Verse 22, if a man is found lying with a married woman, then both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. Thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. So, what should have happened to David? Should have been killed. Yeah, should have been killed. So God extended mercy towards David in relation to this. Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the consequences fell on the child. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a terrible lot going on there because a lot of people will, because of this particular passage, accuse then Bathsheba and say she was a, what do you call it, accomplice, but you know what I'm saying. It's not that. That's not the term I'm looking for. But you know, she was a willing participant. But I would say no, and here's why I would say no. It's not for certain, but here's why I would say no. Under the king's rule, you do what the king says. If you don't do what the king says, you what? You die. Yeah, you die. And, oh, by the way, if the king was supposed to be stoned, who stood up and said the king's supposed to be stoned? Who knew that this went on? Who stood up and said that? There's only one. It's only Nathan. And what did Nathan say in rebuttal to Bathsheba? He doesn't say anything to Bathsheba. He doesn't say anything to Bathsheba. So it's very likely that, I mean, I'm not going to die on this sword, but it's very likely that Bathsheba was it was a case of rape, and she ended up with that child. Yeah, yeah. That's where I fall. And here's the other part of that. The reason that I fall there is because of the response of the men around. You see no one who stands up besides Nathan. Um, and then following that, she loses a child. Um, David then marries her. What's the next child that she has? And it's a big deal when David's on his deathbed. Who's going to be the next king is a big deal. And Bathsheba comes to him and says, because the prophet at that time came to Bathsheba and said, don't you hear that one of David's other sons has proclaimed, and had Joab with him, has proclaimed himself as king? And so he says to Bathsheba, go to the king. Well, she goes to the king and says, my lord, is this what you have done? Did you not say that Solomon would be the king? And David says what? In essence, paraphrase, bring Solomon, I'm going to make him king right now. Well, when Solomon is made king, and rightfully so, there's a lot of emphasis on Solomon. But what does that do for Bathsheba? It's almost like it's a redeeming thing that's going on there in my mind. It's almost like, I talk about this a little bit, that God gives us little appetizers of heaven in terms of just the wrongs that have been done to us, and how there's just sometimes appetizers on those things are made right, but God doesn't say that all things are going to be made right on this earth. So we live in faith, but we live in faith having tasted, not had a meal, but having tasted those appetizers while on earth. And I think that for this is just my own, I'm not trying to make a doctrine out of it, but it seems to me like that's a taste of Bathsheba of a wrong that was done to her on this earth that ultimately is going to be made right for all of eternity in relation to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And if David wouldn't take her in, then what would she have been? Probably a prostitute. Now, the other part of that I would extend out then is what happens after Solomon becomes king. The brother comes in and basically says, be good to me, spare me. And Solomon says, your deeds will speak for yourself, and he lets him go. Basically what he says is, the way you conduct yourself, you can tell me, you're sorry. And again, this is my paraphrase, but you can tell me you're sorry, but your deeds will speak for themselves. Go. Time will tell. It's really what he's saying. Time will tell. You know what he does later? The brother? He goes through Bathsheba. And Bathsheba does go to the king and ask for what he wants. And what does Solomon do? He kills him because he sees through it. He's going to set himself up throne. But what does that tell you about the elevation of Bathsheba? She's got to be pretty high in order for her son Solomon to listen, and for the back door to be, that's the back door to try and get to the king. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot going on there, and I think some of it ties into here. If a man is found lying with a married woman, both of them shall die. Verse 23, if there is a girl who is a virgin engaged to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring both of them out of the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death, the girl because she did not cry out in the city, and the man because he had violated his neighbor's wife. Thus you shall purge evil from among you. So she is an accomplice. I mean, she's a willing participant. If she wasn't a willing participant, what would she have done? Cried for help. If somebody would have heard her, they're not saying that they maybe could have prevented it, but somebody would have heard her then in relation to that. So it's just showing that she was a willing participant. But if in the field the man finds the girl who is engaged and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die, but you shall do nothing to the girl. There is no sin in the girl worthy of death, for just as the man risen against his neighbor and murders him, so is this case. When he found her in the field, the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. So you don't have a willing party in this. What do they look at? What do they look at this man's act equal to? Murder. Murder. I think there's a reason. They say who's the most hated person in prison? Who do you think would be the most hated person in prison? Child molester. Yeah. And rightly so. Because what's he doing? He's doing the exact. You see how all this is playing together from even the very first. He's supposed to protect her to the point of the day when he gives her away. But what are these people doing? Exploiting, taking advantage. Now, if she's a willing participant, then what? She bears the consequence of that. But what do you find? It's not always the case. It's not always the case. They equate it to murder. Verse 28, if a man finds a girl who is a virgin, who is not engaged, seizes her, lies with her, and they are discovered, then the man who lay with her shall give to the girl's father 50 shekels of silver. She shall become his wife because he has violated her. He cannot divorce her all of his days. So what? How do you know? I say this all the time. I say this all the time. Sex before marriage. Why does it matter? Why does it matter? There's a lot of reasons that it matters. But how do you know that you have a commitment? Today's world, how do you know that you have a commitment from that guy? And the answer is, till you stand before God and men and the two become one before witnesses, you don't have a commitment. You don't have a commitment. And he wants to steal and rob from you without committing to you to protect and provide for you, which is his responsibility. And you want to go in and you want to get involved in that? So I'll be into counseling. I mean, these kids are fixing to get married, and I'll tell them, if he wants to do that with you, you better what? You better do a long, hard pause and look at this guy and decide whether or not this is the guy that you want to be with for the rest of your life. Now, am I saying that most kids are that mature? No, but do you want that kind of maturity for your kids? Better believe it. So, verse 30, man shall not take his father's wife, so that he will not uncover his father's skirt. So you've got a lot going on there. He carries out, comes back, to even Lot Lot too, but Noah, and you got a lot going on there in relation to that. So, Deuteronomy is 22 is a big thing in terms of distinct, holy. Holy doesn't mean better than thou. Holy means set apart for particular purposes. And we stand on those things. And it's countercultural. The culture around us says it doesn't matter. And we say it does matter. Even if you don't understand how it matters, it does matter. And we're going to hold to that. When you do that, you go to Pennsylvania and you have a come and see. Right? In the Old Testament, you have a come and see nation. Now, what do you have in the New Testament when you do that? Drag them out and kill them. You're going to be abused. You're going to be harshly treated. You're going to be all those things in the New Testament when you hold to those things. And guess what? We understand that. We understand that. It's okay. It's okay. Understand that. Why? Because our reward is being pushed forward in all those things into all of eternity. So when that happens, it's actually not a bad thing. It's actually a thing to rejoice over, even though it's oppressive and it's hard. But I would say this, particularly for this group, this is a group that, for the most part, you've got kids who are having kids. And what happens a lot of time, that water gets diluted in relation to that. Doesn't matter, Mom. Doesn't matter, Dad. Just old ways, old tradition. It's grounded in much more than that. It means much more than that. The more that we can hold to that, pass that on in a loving way to our kids and our grandkids, what happens? They're blessed. They're blessed. And the nation is built up. So a huge chapter as it turns to marriage, sexual relationships, distinctions, all of those things. It's a huge chapter for that. Deuteronomy 22 is a major chapter as I'm discussing with my kids and as I'm discussing with my grandkids. Why does virginity matter? Why does marriage matter? Why do these things, where are these things grounded in? I turn and start a lot of times in Deuteronomy 22, and then I carry it out because now the New Testament makes sense. Oh, okay. Jesus said, Moses, you specific court because of your hardness of heart. Yeah, you're exposing that girl. And that girl is supposed to be protected as you transition in this thing. So, big question today, and I'm not trying to belabor the point, but it's a big deal today. Why have a service? Why not just elope? One day I would say, I'm with you. Just give them the money and let them go run and elope. But I'm not there anymore. Why? Because you lose this imagery. You lose this imagery. Service matters. Service matters. Am I going to browbeat you for going and eloping? Absolutely not. But am I going to hold to a service matters? Am I going to invite people and say, come, a service matters? I am. Why? Because it portrays this. This is the imagery that it portrays. And it's meant to. It's meant to. And that's what we're trying to uphold. So it's a great, great chapter. All right, let's pray. Father, grateful for your word, grateful for the time we can spend in your word, and Father, just to see your way, how great you are, Father, your character, your nature as it carries it through. And so, Father, just lift up these your people, and Father, just pray that we might stem the tide and stay true to your word and our beliefs, our actions, Father, and just faith that we have in you. These things we pray in your Son's holy name. Amen.